Logic games were my worst section back when I started studying for the LSAT, and they were a large part of the reason why I was stuck in the low 150s for far too long. I would have gotten my 175 much faster if they hadn't been on the test at all. So for me personally, removing logic games would have increased my LSAT score, and I imagine the same is true for a lot of others out there with humanities backgrounds like me. For example, I personally majored in political science. I know a lot of other pre-laws also majored in poli-sci or similar. However, removing logic games would likely reduce LSAT scores for STEM majors, but there are a lot more humanities majors out there applying to law school than there are STEM majors, so a version without logic games is probably easier for the majority of applicants. But we should draw a distinction here. An easier LSAT doesn't make it easier to get a top score because LSAC can simply adjust the quote unquote curve accordingly when they're calculating raw scores into scores out of 180. In fact, April and June LSAT scores were a lot lower than many students expected, and it could be that LSAC is looking to reduce all the recent LSAT score inflation. For those who aren't aware, over the past 4.5 years or so, there has been a ton of LSAT score inflation. LSAT medians at law schools across the board are rising year over year for a couple of reasons. One is the temporary LSAT flex format introduced at the beginning of the pandemic. LSAC kind of messed up the curve on the LSAT flex. They didn't realize that making the LSAT shorter and letting you take it from home would make it easier for people to get higher scores, and they didn't adjust the curve accordingly. Of course, they've also made it a lot easier to get accommodations for extra time on the LSAT over the past few years as a result of several lawsuits, including the one that led them to remove the logic game section for everybody. They've also made it easier to retake the LSAT because they've increased the number of LSAT administrations from 4 per year prior to the pandemic to now 8 times per year. And so more opportunities to take the LSAT means there's more chances to retake the LSAT. And because law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores, but rather they only take the highest score, it makes sense for applicants to retake if it's not going to affect their timeline too much. So all of this to say, a version of the test without the logic game section may make the curve slightly more lenient, meaning you can get more questions wrong and still get a 170. Although the logic game section was the hardest for a lot of applicants like myself going in, it actually is the easiest section to perfect over time because the patterns are more apparent and overt in logic games than in logical reasoning or reading comprehension. So the curve may now going forward become a little bit more lenient, meaning you could get more questions wrong and still get a 170. But because it's harder to score perfectly on logical reasoning or reading comp, this doesn't mean that it's actually easier to get a top score. In LSAC's analysis of the data looking at versions of the test with games and without, they found the curves in scoring with and without logic games essentially came out the same. In LSAC's own analysis of the data looking at versions of the test with logic games and without and how students performed, they found the curves came out essentially the same in the end. Of course, on an individual level, some people do better with games, some do better without, some do the same, but overall, the curve ends up being nearly identical. Regardless, it is what it is going forward. You're going to be taking the LSAT without logic games going forward, and it's unclear whether logic games removal specifically will affect LSAT medians. But with it being easier to retake the LSAT, and with LSAC being more liberal in granting accommodations, LSAT medians are likely to keep increasing no matter what. By LSAC's own admission, retakers do better than those taking the LSAT for the first time, and LSAC is granting 98% of accommodations requests, and this isn't likely to change anytime soon. If you're still taking the LSAT going forward, of course, there are a variety of ways I can help you out on your journey to scoring 170 plus. You can check out the links below this video to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. And of course, since logical reasoning is 2/3 of the test going forward, you're going to want to spend your time focusing there and specifically focusing on the most common types of logical reasoning questions like necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. But you don't just want to stop there. You also want to focus on the method of reasoning in the stimulus and the review process in depth. I've developed a framework to help you review better called the Socratic Review Method. It's a cornerstone of my courses and my one-on-one LSAT coaching programs. And so again, check out the links to find out more and book a call with me and my team. And if you're sad about logic games being off the test, I'm sad to see them go also, but of course it is what it is, and law schools won't care whether you took the LSAT with the logic game section or without the logic game section. And by the way, I know a lot of you out there are sad to see the logic game section go. I'm personally sad to see them go as well, but it is what it is, and law schools won't care which version of the test you took, with the games or without. It's all the same to them. They just want to see the highest LSAT score you can possibly get on your record. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.